February 20th, 1943, north of the Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. The official German battle reports would later describe tank movements, artillery exchanges, and terrain conditions, but they would never capture the moment that stunned the German armored commanders that morning. Through drifting smoke and blowing sand, they watched a group of American Sherman tanks perform maneuvers that should have been impossible. 5 Shermans, scattered across broken desert terrain, separated by hills and wadis that blocked every line of sight, suddenly converged on German positions with a precision that defied logic. They moved as if sharing a single mind, turning simultaneously, shifting formations without a single flare, flag, or messenger. German crews saw no signalman sprinting between tanks, no visual cues at all, yet every American vehicle seemed to know exactly where the others were at every moment. One tank covered an angle another couldn't see. Another pivoted to block a blind approach as if guided by invisible eyes. Inside the German Panzer IV's, commanders struggled to make out even their own company leader's voice through a storm of static. Their FUG-5 radios, the pride of German armored warfare in the 1930s, crackled with interference so loud that orders dissolved into noise as soon as the tanks began to move. The 10-watt transmitters could barely reach a few hundred meters on the move. Most German tanks didn't even have transmitters, only receivers. They could hear sometimes, but they couldn't talk back. They fought half-mute, half-blind, trapped in the rigid communication hierarchy they had always depended on. What German commanders were witnessing that morning was something they didn't yet understand. The Americans were fighting with technology the Germans had no idea existed. Frequency modulation radios in every single tank, using crystal-controlled stability, broadcasting at 25 watts, more than double German power. Radios that sliced through engine rumble, gunfire, static, dust storms, and electrical noise like they weren't even there. 8,000 miles from Detroit assembly lines, the most decisive hidden advantage of the Second World War was revealing itself, not in thick armor or bigger guns or faster engines, but in the invisible electromagnetic threads connecting every American tank to every other tank on the battlefield. The change had begun years earlier, on July 22, 1941, when the U.S. Army standardized the SCR 508, SCR 520-8, and SCR 538 radio sets for all medium tanks. While German divisions raced across the Soviet Union relying on outdated AM transmitters, American engineers at Galvin Manufacturing, soon to be known as Motorola, were perfecting FM radio systems that would make German communications obsolete overnight. The team behind the revolution included Daniel E. Noble, who first imagined FM in armored vehicles, and Henryk Magnuski, the RF engineer who solved the engineering nightmare of installing delicate electronics into a steel machine that roared, rattled, overheated, and shook violently under fire. Their creation, weighing 181 pounds, turned every Sherman tank into a node in what was effectively the world's first digital-age battlefield network. The BC-604 transmitter delivered 25 watts, 2.5 times the German FUG-5's power. The frequency range of 20 to 27.9 MHz offered 10 preset crystal-controlled channels that never drifted, and the dual BC-603 receivers in the SCR 508 allowed American commanders to listen to 2 channels at once, keeping them linked to their platoon net and the company net simultaneously. It created a speed of coordination no other army in the world had. But the true breakthrough wasn't the hardware. It was the frequency modulation itself. Edwin Armstrong's FM technology, licensed to the U.S. military, eliminated the electrical interference that crippled AM radio. German radios picked up every spark plug firing, every track movement, every engine vibration. American radios ignored it all. When American tanks entered North Africa in Operation Torch on November 8, 1942, the Germans quickly realized something was wrong. The Afrika Korps, despite being the most experienced armored force Germany possessed, operated with a communication handicap so severe it would soon change the nature of desert warfare. A typical German tank platoon of 5 vehicles might have only 1 or 2 tanks with full transceivers. The others had receivers only. They could hear instructions but couldn't report back. couldn't warn of enemy armor, couldn't call for artillery, couldn't identify targets. When the command tank was knocked out, and it often was, the entire platoon became deaf, blind, and isolated. American tanks had no such weakness. Every single Sherman could lead if necessary. Every crewman could talk to every other tank. A Sherman platoon could lose its leader and keep full coordination instantly. The Germans didn't understand how catastrophic this disadvantage would become, and within days at Kasserine Pass they would. The fighting at Kasserine Pass from February 14th to 24th, 1943, exposed something the Germans had never encountered before. Even as the battle went in their favor tactically, Wehrmacht observers noticed a strange pattern. American tank units, many of them scattered, disorganized, and inexperienced, were somehow able to coordinate across terrain that made German communication nearly impossible. Tank crews who had never trained together were calling out enemy positions, shifting formations, and coordinating artillery strikes over distances of 50 miles. German signals intelligence intercepted these transmissions and were stunned at the clarity of the American voices coming through. Their own radios at those ranges produced nothing but static. What unnerved the Germans most wasn't American skill, it was the realization that every single American tank seemed to have a full transmitter. This was alien to German doctrine. In their system, only leaders talked, subordinates listened. Americans, however, had built an army where every tank could act as a leader if needed. The technical inferiority of German radios now revealed itself in unforgiving detail. The few G5 transmitters, operating on amplitude modulation in the 27 to 30 3.3 MHz range, were already 5 years behind American technology. Their 10-watt output barely reached 2 or 3 kilometers in optimal conditions. As soon as the tanks moved, electrical interference crushed the signal. Every jolt of the tracks, every ignition cycle of the engine, every spark plug firing created interference patterns that AM radios simply could not filter out. Terrain made the problem worse. In the mountains of Italy, where American armor moved after North Africa in September 1943, German communications nearly collapsed entirely. Valleys, ridges, and folds in the terrain blocked AM signals, turning German tank platoons into isolated pockets with no communication to higher command. In the same terrain, American FM radios thrived. Frequency modulation handled multipath reflections gracefully, meaning communication often remained clear where German radios died instantly. American after-action reports from the 1st Armored Division described routine coordination across ridgelines, through forests, and over broken mountain ground. Coordination that German doctrine said required visual contact and tight formations. But American tanks didn't need visual contact. They had radio contact. And that difference rewrote the rules of armored warfare. By the time American Shermans rolled onto the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, their SCR 508 radios were linking tank crews not only to each other, but to naval gunfire controllers offshore. Shermans could report enemy strongpoints directly to ships firing 12-inch guns miles out at sea. This was unthinkable in German doctrine, where coordination across branches relied on telephone lines or courier vehicles that air power shredded without effort. But Normandy also exposed an unexpected weakness. Tank radios and infantry radios operated on different frequencies. Shermans on 20 to 27.9 could not hear the infantry's SCR 300 sets, operating on 40 to 48 MHz. In the hedgerow labyrinths, this gap proved deadly. German infantry with Panzerfausts could ambush tanks that American foot soldiers saw coming but couldn't warn in time. American innovation solved the issue almost immediately. Crews welded ammunition boxes to the backs of Shermans, installed E8-field telephones inside, and ran cables directly into the tank intercom. Infantry could now walk up to a Sherman, pick up the phone, and talk directly to the commander. This crude but brilliant field modification saved countless tank crews and became standard by the time Operation Cobra launched in late July. And Cobra was where American radio superiority showed its full, terrifying potential. From July 25th to 30th, 1944, the 2nd Armored Division under Major General Edward H. Brooks coordinated more than 200 Shermans using radio networks that allowed an unprecedented level of battlefield control. German defenders from the elite Panzer Lehr division faced American armor that seemed to respond instantly to threats miles away. A German ambush on one road triggered tank movements on another road 10 minutes later, as if the Americans had eyes everywhere. Artillery was called in with lightning speed. Tank destroyers were guided onto targets they couldn't see. The battlefield became a web of interlinked units, trading real-time information over the airwaves. For Panzer Lehr, one of Germany's best formations, the experience was devastating. Their Panthers and Panzer IV's were stronger one-on-one, but most of them lacked radios entirely or operated with receivers only. They fought as isolated machines, while American tanks fought as an interconnected organism. It was a painful irony. Germany had invented modern armored warfare. Guderian had championed radios in tanks as early as the 1920s. His 1937 book had practically shouted that communication was the backbone of blitzkrieg. But by 1943, Germany couldn't equip even half its tanks with modern transceivers. Resources were exhausted, factories overloaded, and radio production couldn't keep up with tank manufacturing. In contrast, America not only matched tank production with radio production, they surpassed it. Every single Sherman rolled off the line with a sophisticated FM radio. Not one was sent into battle without one. The gap was widening into an abyss. American industrial power now revealed itself not just in numbers but in precision. Motorola's Chicago factories, which before the war had produced car radios, underwent a complete transformation to meet military demand. Retooling the plants meant rebuilding entire production lines by hand, solving thousands of engineering problems that no factory in the world had ever faced. Each SCR 508 radio required nearly 3,000 individual components, each one precise enough to survive the violent shaking, heat, oil fumes, and raw vibration inside a tank. The BC 604 transmitter alone contained almost 500 capacitors. Every crystal oscillator had to hold frequency without drifting, even as the temperature inside a Sherman tank reached levels hot enough to scorch bare skin. But America made it work. Production numbers told the story. In 1942, roughly 4,000 SCR 508 radios rolled out of the factory. In 1943, more than 11,000. By 1944, nearly 25,000. By the war's end, the number exceeded 50,000, enough to equip every single Sherman tank, every last one of the 49,324 built, with full FM radio capability. No other nation came remotely close to this. German production lagged years behind. In 1943, Germany built almost 6,000 medium tanks, yet fewer than 2,000 Fu-G transceivers were produced that year. Even many of those went to command vehicles, leaving frontline tank units with gaping communication holes. German tank battalions entered combat with platoons in which only one tank could actually transmit. The rest fought in silence. Soviet tank units suffered even worse. The mighty T-34, numerically the most important tank on the Eastern Front, usually entered battle with no radio at all. Soviet commanders relied on flags, hand signals, or pre-battle instructions. By war's end, only a fraction of Soviet tanks had any radio equipment at all, and many of those were supplied, through Lend-Lease, by the Americans themselves. Against that backdrop, the American achievement was staggering. 100% radio deployment on every Sherman tank, and not just any radios, FM radios with stability, clarity, and power unmatched anywhere else in the world. The SCR 508's advantages extended far beyond simple communication. Crystal-controlled channels meant tanks could preset frequencies before a battle, and know with certainty that they would align even after being slammed by recoil, hammered by artillery, or jostled across rough terrain. Meanwhile, German variable capacitors drifted constantly. German radio operators spent precious time retuning frequencies manually, hoping to catch faint, distorted voices through waves of static. Inside American tanks, the BC 606 intercom kept crews linked. Driver, gunner, loader, commander, everybody stayed connected. Throat microphones picked up speech even while engines roared and cannons blasted. American commanders could react instantly, turning their turret the moment a loader or gunner spotted a threat. Many German tanks, even late in the war, lacked intercom systems entirely. Crews shouted, tapped, or kicked each other to communicate inside their steel boxes. Power management added another layer of superiority. The SCR 508 could run on 12 or 24 volts, whichever was available, thanks to a dynamotor power supply that filtered electrical noise. German radios had no such insulation. Every electrical spark in a Panzer, every motor rotation, every track jolt, poured noise into the radio system. The tactical consequences were enormous. American armored divisions pioneered the combat command system. Flexible, interchangeable formations that could mix tanks, infantry, tank destroyers, and artillery on the fly. These task forces existed solely because the radios allowed them to. A Sherman crew could be reassigned mid-battle to new units without losing coordination. German commanders, bound to rigid structures and limited communications, could not replicate this. The Battle of Arcourt in September 1944 revealed how devastating this difference had become. The 4th Armored Division, guided by clear radio traffic, intercepted and outmaneuvered multiple German Panzer brigades equipped with superior Panther tanks. The German advantage in gun power and armor meant nothing when American units could concentrate fire from multiple directions, call in artillery within minutes, redirect tank destroyers instantly, and coordinate from over the horizon. Over 3 weeks, the Americans destroyed 281 German armored vehicles and lost only 41 Shermans, a kill ratio that stunned observers. Panther tanks that outranged and outgunned Shermans were consistently defeated not because of inferior design, but because the American network fought as a single organism, while German vehicles fought as individuals. Even at this stage of the war, German intelligence still underestimated the true American advantage. Reports noted American radio discipline but assumed it came from training rather than technology. German officers never fully grasped that they were fighting an enemy whose tanks all possessed capabilities that only German command vehicles had. They continued targeting Shermans with multiple antennas, thinking those were command tanks. But in the American system, every Sherman was a command tank. This misunderstanding cost lives by the thousands. By March 1945, as American forces closed in on the Rhine, the full weight of American communication superiority pressed down on the collapsing German front. The scramble for the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen was the moment that shocked even seasoned German officers. When scouts from the 9th Armored Division reached the riverbank and realized the bridge was still standing, their radio reports shot back to headquarters within minutes. Those messages rippled outward through battalions, regiments, and corps like lightning. Entire divisions shifted direction within an hour. What should have taken a day in the chaos of battle happened almost instantly because the American network never slept. German forces, by contrast, had practically no communications left. Telephone lines had been shredded for months by Allied air power. Radios that survived were hampered by drift, static, and weak output that collapsed the moment tanks moved. German counterattacks arrived piecemeal, units stumbling into a battlefield already reorganized around them. Many German formations didn't even know the bridge had fallen intact until after American tanks were already across it. As the Allies expanded their foothold over the Rhine, American tanks worked in seamless cooperation. Shermans from different divisions found themselves fighting side by side, linking up instantly through shared radio frequencies. They swapped target information, coordinated artillery fire, and divided sectors in seconds. Meanwhile, German attempts to counterattack fell apart because their forces couldn't communicate with adjacent units or even with their own headquarters. Field Marshal Walter Model's final messages reflected the collapse: no contact with adjacent units, no communication with higher headquarters, coordination impossible. After that, silence. The pocket around the Ruhr would become one of the largest encirclements in military history. More than 300,000 German soldiers were trapped, not only by American firepower, but by American communication dominance. Every attempt at breakout across the pocket failed, because American tank units moved with a precision and speed that German commanders couldn't understand. Fighter bombers, guided by radio-equipped forward air controllers, struck every German communication node they could find. The Wehrmacht, now deaf and blind, collapsed in segments. For American crews, the psychological experience of battle was transformed. Inside a Sherman, even when surrounded, even when cut off visually, the crew never felt alone. They could hear the voices of fellow tankers miles away. They could call artillery. They could warn infantry. They could report the approach of enemy armor. They fought as threads in a massive interconnected web. German tank crews lived the opposite reality. Otto Carius, one of the most successful German tank commanders, described fighting in a world where silence meant death. Without radios, crews relied on frantic hand signals, kicks, or shouts inside the cramped tank. Outside, platoons often had no idea where neighboring units were. A tank could turn a corner and run face-first into an ambush simply because no one had been able to warn them. Strategically, the effects were even greater. American advances across France in 1944 had stunned the Germans not because of superior tank design, but because the Americans could maintain operational tempo. Armored columns stretched for miles, but radio links held them together like a spine. Orders could leapfrog across tens of miles, allowing rapid shifts in direction that German planners believed impossible. The Third Army's race across France, Patton's legendary advance, would have been physically impossible without universal FM radio communication. German forces, unable to coordinate quickly across divisions, were repeatedly outflanked before they even realized the danger. German commanders rarely understood why American maneuvers were so precise. Many assumed the Americans used coded signals or had unusually good reconnaissance. Few realized that every Sherman was part of a vast unified network. Even Guderian, who had once championed radios as the foundation of armored warfare, acknowledged near the end of the war that German tank quality was meaningless without communication. His December 1944 memorandum admitted what no one wanted to say aloud: American radio coordination raced German advantages in armor, gun power, and crew experience. After the surrender, American technical teams studied German radios in detail. Their findings confirmed the gap that battlefield experience had already proven. German tank radios were effectively half a decade behind American systems. They lacked frequency modulation, they lacked stability, they lacked noise filtering, they lacked widespread deployment. Soviet analysts reached the same conclusion. Studying captured German and American equipment, they chose to base their post-war designs, not on German engineering but on American FM radios. Statistics captured the magnitude of the difference. American factories produced over 50,000 SCR 508 family radios. German factories built roughly 6,000 Fu-G5 transceivers during Bar period when they produced more than 12,000 medium and heavy tanks. In practice, this meant perhaps 20% of German tanks had full communication capability. 100% of American tanks did. Frequency stability? American radios drifted by just 0.01%. German radios drifted by as much as a full percent. Range? American tanks on the move could often communicate over 7 miles. German tanks sometimes struggled to reach a kilometer. Artillery response time? American units could get a fire mission in 3 to 5 minutes. German units waited 15 to 30. By the war's end, every tank battle confirmed the same truth. The Sherman's greatest weapon was not its gun, it was not its armor. It was the 181 pounds of FM radio equipment bolted inside its steel frame. That radio transformed the Sherman from a single fighting machine into one cell of a much larger organism, a network that always outperformed isolated opponents, no matter how technically superior those opponents' tanks were. This was the first battlefield network in modern history. It made every Sherman stronger by connecting it to all the others. German forces discovered too late that they weren't being defeated by tanks. They were being defeated by information, by coordination, by the ability to fight as one. The electromagnetic spectrum, silent, invisible, unstoppable, shaped the outcome of armored warfare more decisively than armor thickness or gun caliber ever could. By the spring of 1945, it was undeniable. The Americans had not simply outbuilt Germany, they had outconnected them. The Sherman tank, often mocked after the war for its thinner armor and weaker gun, had revealed its true power. Its genius wasn't in steel or cannon, it was in the invisible network binding every tank crew together. Each Sherman was not just a machine. It was a node in a larger system. A single tank might be outgunned by a Panther, but a platoon of Shermans linked through flawless FM radios could outmaneuver, outflank, and outshoot even the most formidable German tanks. They operated like a swarm, each vehicle aware of the others, all moving with purpose and coherence. When a German Panther emerged from behind a ridge, every Sherman within range learned about it within seconds. When infantry spotted an ambush, the nearest Sherman could warn tanks miles away. When artillery was needed, tank commanders transmitted coordinates instantly. What took Germans minutes or even hours to coordinate took Americans moments. German tankers described it after the war with a mix of frustration and reluctant admiration. They said the Americans fought like they shared a single nervous system. Battles became nightmares of unseen coordination. A German attack would begin promisingly, then collapse as American tanks shifted positions with uncanny timing. Panthers would be ambushed from the side by Shermans that moments earlier had been out of sight. Panzer IV's would break through a line only to be met by a rapid, concentrated response that seemed orchestrated in real time. Many German commanders assumed the Americans had more scouts, or better reconnaissance aircraft, or some unknown signaling method. Few realized that the answer was far more fundamental. Communication. The Americans built superior communication into their doctrine, their factories, and their tanks. The Germans relied on command hierarchy and visual control, systems that shattered under modern combat conditions. German tanks were individually formidable, but collectively lonely. Without radios, each vehicle fought its own private war. Without coordination, even the mighty Panther became a blunt instrument. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel's rumored comment at the surrender signing captured the essence of this imbalance. We knew how to build better tanks. You knew how to make them work together. Whether he actually said the words or not, the sentiment reflected the truth shared across the German officer corps. The Americans had turned the battlefield into a living network. The Germans stuck with 1930s radio technology, fought like isolated islands. After the war, militaries around the world analyzed the lessons. The Bundeswehr, rebuilt in the 1950s, placed communication at the heart of its armored doctrine. Every Leopard tank was equipped with comprehensive radios, a direct correction of the failures of the Panzer divisions. Soviet planners studying captured equipment discovered American FM radios were far superior and patterned multiple post-war systems after them. The age of network-centric warfare, the idea that the military that communicates best wins, was born not in the digital era, but in the dust and smoke of 1942 and 1943, when the first Sherman with an SCR 508 entered combat. Modern wars have repeatedly confirmed this principle. In the 1991 Gulf War, Iraqi tanks were powerful, but their radios were crude. Coalition forces annihilated them with coordination so fast that Iraqi units often never realized what hit them. In 2003, American forces again demonstrated that the networked army beats the heavily armored army every time. The story of Sherman radio superiority is a reminder that wars are not won by the biggest guns or thickest armor, but by how well a force can think, react, share information, and adapt as a unified whole. The Americans understood this instinctively, building a system where every tank became an extension of every other tank. German tank crews learned this truth the hard way, on battlefields stretching from Tunisia to Italy, from the hedgerows of Normandy to the plains of France, and finally in the collapsing heart of the Reich. They saw Shermans appear from angles they thought impossible. They watched artillery fall with frightening speed and accuracy. They confronted an enemy whose tanks moved with the grace of a well-trained formation even when separated by miles. In the end, the Sherman's radio, its 181-pound heart of copper coils, vacuum tubes, crystals, and wiring, proved more powerful than the German 88mm gun. It created an army that fought as one, an army that could see without seeing, coordinate without signals, react without hesitation. The electromagnetic waves humming out of every Sherman turret decided battles long before the tanks traded shots. And once that truth became evident, the rest of the war was simply the inevitable unfolding of an advantage Germany never understood in time. The network defeated the platform. The connected defeated the isolated. And in the silent space between those radio waves, the future of warfare was written.